today we have a very special guest, Mr. Greg Masler. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, and if you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Of course. My name is Greg Masler. I'm an attorney located in Irvine, which is here in Orange County. And I've been an attorney licensed since 1996. But I have been practicing in the area of assisted reproductive technology for over 20 years. And it's almost exclusively my practice, assisting people that are going through surrogacy and egg donation arrangements, sperm donation, embryo donation. And we have a staff of about 6 people at our office, another attorney, a few paralegals, some legal assistants. So thank you for having me.
Of course, wonderful. Thank you for joining us. I did want to let our registers know that we have a chance at some really great prizes today. So for everyone that registers, you do automatically receive a $500 credit, for our services. At the end of this presentation, we will have Greg also pick one lucky winner for an additional $1,000 off of our services discount. And also, everyone that registers today is eligible for a complimentary consultation with Greg and his firm. So make sure that you scan the QR code that is located on the screen, enter your information, so you are eligible to win some great prizes today. And we are also offering, some free consultations. Well, free consultations to all intended parents with ACRC for any reproductive services. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code on our screen here to go ahead and register for a complimentary consultation with our team. All right, Greg, so if you can tell us a little bit about what we're here to talk about today, surrogacy law, all of the details that you think would be pertinent for, things that you're hearing in the industry that people might be wondering with what's happening today in surrogacy law.
Of course. So this is a very special arrangement, surrogacy, and there's a lot of aspects. And there's much that could be covered probably in more than one seminar. But I did want to bring up a few, I think, very important things that people should be considering when they're going through surrogacy. So, of course, surrogacy is a method, if you will, of pathway to parentage, where a woman would be carrying your child, and then you would consequentially become the parent of the child. And there's 2 forms of surrogacy that are, depending on the state, are legal. One is called traditional or genetic surrogacy, where it's the surrogate's own genetic material, the eggs, and the surrogate would carry the child to term and then would become the parent of the child. The other method, which is probably the more popular and in some states the only one that's legally recognized, is something called gestational surrogacy, where it is the surrogate would have embryos that are created from either donor eggs, sperm, or the parent's own genetic material, transferred to the surrogate, and the surrogate would give birth, and the parents would, of course, be the parents of the child through legal methods.
More common of the 2, I would say.
More common of the 2, and here in California, let's just say it's the one method that is legally recognized for certain. So the key parts of a surrogacy arrangement are going to be the contract. I'm talking about from the legal aspect, would be the contract, and the contract would be between the surrogate and intended parents. Most states, I'm sure all, would require this to be done prior to the transfer, okay, to be able to show intent, that the parties intended to have this arrangement. This is the second step of the legal process that's very important, and here in California and most states they would call it the pre-birth order. And what this is a parentage action. So this is actually a process that would be filed with the court, and it would, let's say, just validate what has already been written in the contract. Some states have what they call a post-birth action, and maybe both, where there's pre-birth and post-birth. So it depends on the state, but this is most important. Either method, again, whatever the state requires, to make sure that you, the parents, get on to the birth certificate. Without it, you won't. So some key clauses in a contract, so there has to be agreement, and this starts it off. And some very key clauses are laying out the parental rights. Who are the parents? Whose embryos were, what was the genetic material to create the embryos? That's very important here in California. Compensation structure, this is really critical, and great agencies like yours lay it out very well and makes it easier for us attorneys. We do thank you to be able to document this. Insurance, other medical expenses needs to be documented as well. As well as, let me just throw in a confidentiality aspect. Something that doesn't come up too often as far as any kind of issues between the parties, but it's very good to document who knows about this arrangement, who can know about the arrangement besides the professionals that are involved.
Cover all potential aspects.
These are some things amongst others. These contracts tend to be over 20 pages long because there's a lot to cover, actually. So with respect to the legal considerations, having good legal counsel is important. I can't stress that enough. No matter what the legal issue that you're dealing with, you wouldn't want to have someone assist you with a car accident case that was not familiar with this area of law. And same thing here. There are some great professionals throughout the US, and having an attorney experienced in this area is critical. It's essential. The states do vary on laws, and they do vary quite a bit. California, we have some very good law here in California. Some things I've noted down, just worthwhile mentioning, maybe some of the things you were going to discuss, is here that the surrogates and the intended parents need to have their own separate counsel. Parents can have their own attorney, surrogate can have her attorney, but they can't be the same one. There has to be a contract in place prior to the transfer. There can be a pre-birth order. Our law says that you can file the order for parentage prior to the birth of the child. And so there's several other things, and again, I imagine some of these will come on some of your questions.
We'll be touching on much more.
But I did want to mention, if it's okay, 2 states that have current laws.
Yes, please.
And so there are 2 states that stand out that were once illegal to have surrogacy. One of those was the state of New York, which has a large population of people, and I imagine maybe has more opportunity to choose from for surrogates. But in New York, they have what they call a surrogate's Bill of Rights, and it gives surrogates rights which probably are implicit anyways, and probably would come out in the contract and just would be realities. So for instance, a surrogate can make a decision per their law to be able to back out of the arrangement. There couldn't be a contract that said she would be in violation of contract to back out of the surrogacy arrangement prior to a transfer. The surrogate would be able to choose the OB there. Not seemingly from my reading, it doesn't say IVF physician. I don't believe it means that, but excuse me, the OB most certainly surrogate be able to pick the OB. And the other standout for our state, is Michigan. Okay, the state of Michigan was also another state where surrogacy was not permitted, and now they passed a law that was enacted in April. And surrogacy there is not only recognized for gestational surrogacy, but they have traditional or genetic surrogacy. As long as there's an agreement in place that it's been recognized that the surrogate is going to be using, in effect, her own eggs for the surrogacy arrangement. So the other aspect in Michigan is that there needs to be a Michigan resident. One of the parties has to be from Michigan, and the transfer has to be there. That distinguishes it a little bit, if I could, by contrast here in California. We have had matches where a transfer occurred in California, and maybe the surrogate resided elsewhere, and the parents. And that would be based on the circumstances, not every single arrangement. But in Michigan, there has to be one of the parties and a transfer in Michigan. That seemed to be a standout there as well. So this just a little summary. There's so much more, and I'm sure more you'll be be asking about.
Yes, so much more to dive into as we go further into this webinar. So we'll go ahead and start with our first question. So just kind of, again, covering legal basics and the legal process. What are the key legal steps intended parents should take before starting their surrogacy journey?
As far as legal steps are concerned, I think it's going to be important to understand the basics of any surrogacy arrangement in the state that you're in. Because the good news is more states have surrogacy law, right, but there's aspects of each state that you'll want to know. For instance, to give you an example, is the state that you're going to be choosing your surrogate or thinking about a surrogate, would they recognize both parents if they were not married as parents of the child? That's very significant to consider. Another thing may be, with the state that you're in, permit abortion or selective reduction. This is going to be another thing. So I think knowing the states that you're considering, having an idea, talking maybe to attorneys to consult with them in advance to see what legal things to consider in those states.
And this would be both for the state in which the transfer is occurring, as well as where your surrogate might be residing as well. The laws in both, just to make sure all grounds are covered.
I think so. I think if you're going to be, to me, logic says if you're going to be transferring in a state, most certainly there's not going to be anything to inhibit the surrogacy arrangement, but it's a good idea, yes, making sure you're well informed, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And our next question, how does the legal process work for establishing intended parents' parental rights?
So and again, I'm going to speak universally, it's got to be a contract or an agreement. This is very critical because I like to tell my clients the contract or agreement is the thing. This is what establishes the parental relationship in here. And I do have to say, I'm speaking generally, but I'm a California attorney. I'm not licensed in any other state, so I'm speaking about with respect to here. But I think generally speaking, it's fair to say the contract would establish the parental rights. And as long as the contract documents who the parents are, and for instance, it's the parents' embryos that are transferred to the surrogate, they are the parents based on this contract. It's a foundation of parental rights. And then the second step is this pre-birth, at least here in California, in most states we call it the pre-birth order. This is a process with a lot of documents filed with the court. I have a great team in my office that works very hard. We start in the end of the first trimester, beginning of the second, to make sure we have all the documents ready and to be ready to be filed, and we get that order. Ideally, we like to get it by around week 20. Typically it's a little bit later, but we like to get it as early as possible so you are protected as soon as possible as far as your parental rights.
And everyone can go into the hospital happy and prepared with exactly what the plan is laid out, and can go home with their baby and home to their families to rest for the surrogates portion.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great, thank you. Next question, what are the most important things to look for when reviewing a surrogate contract?
I think following your lawyer's lead is going to be very important. And I'm saying this obviously so it keeps lawyers like us in business, but no, in all seriousness, I think people looking at an agreement, it's a bit daunting. 20 plus pages, and trying to decipher what all this means, how does it all relate to them, to the surrogate, to the process. So I do think taking your attorney's lead, making sure you're asking the questions that you may need to ask. I think that making sure you're aware of the financial aspects, make sure in advance. I do recommend, it is very helpful if the parents know in advance what they've agreed to. And so when they're looking at a contract, because we draft what the parties presumably have agreed to. And so I think that's going to be a very important aspect to look at. And another thing I would say is the conduct of the surrogate. That there may be different expectations. Some of them very significant, some of them what I consider, I want to say minor, but how much caffeine would a surrogate drink? This is obviously significant, but more significant things like what kind of issues about abortion, selective reduction. Things that are maybe more critical, making sure this is vetted out And what's in the contract is what has been agreed to.
Again, preparing for any possible scenario that may be encountered. You know, everything is, I think, fairly positive entering into an agreement, but because so much is unknown, it's better to be prepared for all of those small things. You know, what if an abortion is needed? Is the surrogate on board with that? And just making sure that there's an agreement before there's a baby involved.
Absolutely, I think it's very well said. Having what's in the agreement, making sure you're not bypassing something that could come up. And you have to think of the what ifs. I mean, that's why there's a contract in place after all. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, our next question. How does the contract protect both the intended parents and our surrogates?
Yes, so the contract is a legal document, and it does lay out rights and responsibilities like any other contract that someone would enter into. And it's important to know that what's written in the contract is something that the party should adhere to. Obviously there are lawyers, because I mean, in my line of work, I'm not what's called a litigator. So in a former life, I did go to court and I enjoyed that. But now I try to draft contracts to address issues like what you're talking about. So the contract is there to protect both parties. I wish I could say it's a suit of armor to deflect everything, but having a good contract, again, that lays out what everyone's agreed to, the terms, expectations, exactly, is going to be the best way to, I think, protect the parties.
Okay, and our next question, are there specific legal requirements for international intended parents, which we do have quite a few of?
Yes, so this is an excellent question, and I think in large part it's going to be one that you should consider talking to counsel in your home country if that may be an issue. And I'm thinking a lot with intended parents that are in Europe. There are special requirements when it comes to surrogacy. So it's going to be very important for you to speak to counsel in your home country. Make sure your attorney that you're working with here is understanding if there's anything that you've heard from your attorneys in your home country. If that's the case, make sure they're connected. I always like to speak to attorneys from outside the U.S. if there's something that I need to know. Here in the States, I think it's going to be important when it's time to go home, know sort of the status of being able to bring your baby home. Maybe plan on being, if you're traveling here at the time of picking up the baby, make sure you're planning enough time to be present, to be able to do all you need to do, passports, anything one needs to do to be able to bring their baby home. So from us as lawyers, nothing for here in the U.S. specific,
Right.
but it's the preparation before and after.
Okay, great, thank you. And what role does an attorney such as yourself play throughout the surrogacy process? We touched on it a little bit, but.
So another interesting question, maybe relevant. The states I mentioned, New York and Michigan, have written in their law that the attorneys need to be involved through the surrogacy arrangement. And the legislature that drafted it probably wasn't very familiar with what that means. It is a little open-ended to how much involvement will we have. Again, I'm what's called a transactional attorney. We don't expect any kind of legal issues would lead to court, but what would be my role? And I would have to refer out. So as far as us, we're always there for our clients. Our clients will call surrogates, parents, maybe with questions. We're happy to answer them. I have, again, a great staff that are very experienced and good with dealing with people that call may have questions, maybe concerns. So I guess the best way to answer, we're there to listen, to provide what information we can, but between contract and the pre-birth order, we have no specific role, I guess is the best way of saying, but we're there for our clients.
Thank you so much. And then how do surrogacy laws differ across states, which I know we touched on a little bit with the bigger topic states, and why is it important to work with an agency that understands these differences?
Yeah, I think working with an agency like yours that understands these differences is very, very important. And one of the things that impresses me about your agency is how familiar your agency is with the different aspects. You know, being knowledgeable is a big help, because before us attorneys get a referral, they're going to get a lot of information and their hands being held by the agency. So this is going to be critical. The states do vary. They vary quite a bit. And I mentioned three very pro-surrogacy states, but there are states that are a bit of a gray area. And it may make a difference if it's a straight or a gay couple, as I said, single or unmarried couples, whether there's abortion would be permitted, for instance. International domestic issues just about traveling. We were just talking about this earlier, about travel. Is it going to be easy to get in and out? What kind of accommodations are you going to have? How much access are you going to have to your surrogate? So this is going to be it's going to be very important to know the states. And once you do have an attorney, make sure you're talking to your attorney about all things that could come up. Can't predict everything. But being able to know what is a possibility that could come up is going to be a significant issue. If I could bring up one other thing too. So especially for those who may not be familiar with geography here, in California, if you have a surrogate, chances are she's not traveling out of the state. She may have family, there may be, but she wouldn't have to. There are some states where a surrogate may reside in one portion of the state, but she has to do her grocery shopping in another. And though I've never had this in my practice, if she were to give birth in that other state, for instance, it may not be as surrogacy friendly as where she resides.
And all documents are
so no,
filed.
right, where the document, right,
Yes.
Exactly. So knowing this, even though I bring this up, like I said, it's never happened in a match that I've been involved with, I think it's going to be important to know.
To know. Yeah, state lines definitely do change, I think, every aspect of the agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what is the difference between a pre-birth order, as you previously mentioned, and a post-birth order? And furthermore, how does it affect intended parents?
You know, and I have to say, because California is pre-birth only, and we have had some matches throughout the years where we had to get a post-birth, where we had a surrogate in another state, and we worked with an attorney in that other state. So this is not, I have to say, I saw the question, and I'd like to speak to it as best as I can, but I have to probably defer because California is pre-birth. So there are some states that would require an order after the birth of the child. And my understanding, at least in one of the states that we work with, I believe they had sort of a two-step process. Sort of a pre-birth, I would guess you would call it, that allowed the parents to be able to access the baby and have say at the hospital about care, and then there would be sort of I guess it would be a post-birth order for the birth certificate, if I understood. Right. But this is, again, it's been some time. I think, again, it's going to be important if you're working with a surrogate who is in another state, make sure you're talking about all these issues in advance with your attorney. Make sure you're prepared.
Preparation is the best plan.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. And next question, what is your biggest piece of legal advice for intended parents starting this journey?
I think, you know, the things that I covered, I think are going to be critical. Knowing the laws of your home countries, if you're out of the U.S., knowing the laws of the state, if you are in the U.S., knowing the laws of the states that your surrogate's going to give birth or may have a transfer, making sure you understand your contract. I think this is important. It's long. Don't discard it.
Not something you just want to sign when you get it.
No, it's not. Yeah, this is not something, and it is something that the parties work with the negotiation process. So be comfortable with it, understand it, make sure you're familiar with key aspects. And if you have questions, I think best legal advice, talk to your lawyer. Make sure you are aware of your rights, responsibilities.
I tell anybody that I speak to, when you get your contract, print it out and mark it up. So when you have your meeting with your attorney, you can go through, even if it's a question with, what does this word mean? Because I've read through those contracts and there's plenty of, legal jargon that is required, but not necessarily easy to understand for someone that isn't, reading it every day and didn't study it. So, I always just say, print it out, highlight everything, sit down with your attorney and go through, anything that you don't understand.
Excellent advice. Being prepared for the consult with the attorney is going to help immensely as far as understanding the document you eventually be signing.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, and then just a fun question. What is a favorite part of the job that you do, and why do you love working with us here at ACRC?
Well, let me speak, as far as working with your agency. As I mentioned, the information and knowledge I find that your agency has, the ease of working with your staff, always able to reach someone. If there's a question I have, I know I'm going to get an answer. I appreciate, again, just the knowledge and experience and help. And this is very important for us as attorneys. I mean, we have a role, we have a contract to draft, but there's so much more that goes into a surrogacy or arrangement or journey. And having a great agency like yours is a big help all around for everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so.
And then a little bit about your favorite part of the work that you do.
Favorite part of the work I do is helping with my little bit of this journey that parents are going through. We've seen children come to we've had parents come with babies to the office, and it's amazing to think we had this little tiny part as an attorney in helping that out. And I've gone to court where it used to be a judge that required everyone to go to court for the pre-birth order. It's no longer the case now. It's all basically paperwork. But had the experience of seeing a couple break down in tears at just getting the judgment. And to us, we're lawyers, we just think this is what we do.
Paperwork, right?
Paperwork, it's just what we do. But this was so emotional to them, and it really struck home what we do as lawyers. So I think that's the most fun, and I think I speak for everyone that works at my firm too about that as well.
A very large part in what we do, I think, with fertility services. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of negotiations, and dealing with doctors and so many things. But at the end of it, it's creating a family for someone that is looking to expand or start a new family. And I think when we get to the end point and seeing that happy family take their child or children home, it just makes it that much better every time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So again, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Thank you so much, Greg, for your time and your expertise. As always, it's a pleasure. We here at ACRC are your global partner in building families. If you did not get a chance, I do want to go ahead and note our contact information here. If you are interested in scheduling a consultation with Greg and his team, you can go ahead and reach out to us. We will include his contact information for you. Our contact information is listed on the screen here. Just please remember, everyone who registered today is eligible for a free consultation. And if you win today's raffle, you are also eligible for up to $1,500 in discounts for our services. And with that, we will go ahead and pick our winner. So we'll have Greg choose his lucky number for today. Pick your number.
Okay.
Which one looks good to you?
So I'm going to pick 246071.
Okay, and if that is your number, you will be receiving an email from our team with the details of your win today. Anyone who did register did get a $500 credit for filling out the form and being present here today. And Greg was so kind, his team is offering also complimentary consultations for representation for surrogacy services. So thank you so much again. We look forward to our next webinar. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.